Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Revolution of Being podcast. So, today we're going to talk about something that is really near and dear to Jessica and mine's heart, which is the integration of Western care with more holistic modalities. And this is specifically speaking to the people who are maybe on the autoimmune spectrum, people who have had chronic inflammation, unexplained symptoms. They feel like they're being gaslit by their doctors, right? You get your labs done, everything's within normal limits, and those who can't see me, I'm doing the air sign, air fingers of air quotes within normal limits, but you know that your body is not, something's not right. And this happened to me recently. So I'm very well educated in the functional realm. And about a week and a half ago, I went to the clinic just to get a panel of labs. And because I knew, I'm having some autoimmune activity, things aren't right. I'm having kind of a flare up of symptoms. And so I asked the doctor for very specific labs, including a very comprehensive thyroid panel. And the feedback I got was, well, your TSH is normal. We're not going to run the others. And I said, I'm having these symptoms. I really need you to run like the T3 and T4 so I can get a better understanding of where things are at. Because again, just because something's in the realm of air quote normal does not mean it is. And so I had to ask 4 separate times. And, I'm a nurse, I'm educated in this area. And I, as someone educated, had to advocate really hard to get these things drawn. And when I did, my T3 was a little bit lower. Again, still in normal limits according to the Western kind of model, but it reflects that there's something going on in my body. I also had some abnormalities within normal limits in my blood ranges within like my white blood cell counts. That also points to inflammation, autoimmunity, whatever. But Western medicine says, see, everything's fine, kind of carry on. And this is where a lot of people get medically gaslit. And so what we want to talk about today is really like how to become an advocate for your health, but the foundational things that you can begin to do, because Jess and I, we've been on this journey. I've been on it with intention for over 5 years. You've been on it for what, 20 something years. And so we've really learned a ton. In that, though, it's very overwhelming when you're just starting to learn about holistic modalities to heal. And I am 100% in belief, and you cannot change my mind on this, that our bodies are designed to heal, that you can have a diagnosis of autoimmunity and put it into remission because there are so many factors that we have control of that contribute to the development of autoimmunity, including our diet, the stress in our lifestyle, the toxins we're exposed to, kind of chronic inflammation or infections that we have. So there's a lot we can do. But before we get into that rabbit hole, today we just want to talk about the foundational things that you can start doing if you notice like there's something wrong in my body. Maybe you're in a phase in your life where you're becoming perimenopausal. And this is a time where a lot of women begin to really experience these shifts. And then autoimmunity starts to really peek through because we don't have as many of the protective hormones we had when we were younger. For a lot of people, COVID was also a catalyst. Because of high stress, because of vaccine injuries, because of the stress of the virus itself, a lot of people had shifts, notice that they noticed in 2020. So if you're someone who's like, I'm losing my hair, my sleep is suddenly starting to suck. I used to be able to lose weight easily. Now I'm stalling out. I'm feeling more anxious or more brain foggy or so many arrays of symptoms. This is an episode you're really going to want to tune into because we really want to distill down just again some really basic things that will begin to move the pendulum for you. And this is about, Jess and I talk often about the sustainability of lifestyle practices. This is what I teach my clients too with mindset is this is not a race, it's a marathon, and it's about sustainability. It's about habit stacking and becoming the identity of the person who can heal, because the person who got sick is not the same person who's going to get well. So to launch in, Jess, I know you've talked about your journey with autoimmunity. And again, this goes back quite a while when you were starting to have some, body changes that were just red flags. And I know this goes back even to your childhood. But once you kind of started to wake up to like, there's got to be a different way, what were some of the first things that you did that you started to research? Again, this was before this was cool. Like, you're the OG. Like, so to those of us going through this now, it's a privilege because so much more information exists than it did when you were dealing with this back then. So what were some of the things you started to research? And, tell us a little bit more about your journey.
So back when this all kind of hit for me, I was in my early to mid 20s. I obviously was having problems years prior, and like so many other people, you go through the same motions. You don't feel good, you go to the doctor, they run your blood work, pretty much always give you the same answer. Everything's fine. At some point, I was told I was just depressed. I was issued antidepressants, that kind of stuff. And it was right after my youngest son was born. That's when things started to really kind of click. I had gone in for my 6-week checkup and I knew I was feeling really bad. And of course, they want to blame, postpartum depression, right? That's the label they throw on it. I thought it was pretty bad. I didn't remember having that with my first to this degree. It was really bad. And I don't know, a week or two later, my labs came back and my thyroid panel was pretty wonky. Now, they didn't run like a TPO, like antibodies or anything like that, because they didn't do that then. They didn't do that at the clinic. I think back 20 years ago, this was not something that was really known about. And so I get these labs back, I get the call, and they tell me I have postpartum hypothyroidism. And so I go to see an endocrinologist and they evaluated all my symptoms. Well, I had been hypo and then it had shifted to hyper. And so by this point in time, I was very shaky. I was very nervous and anxious and amped up, and I was losing a lot of weight and I was going through all these shifts. And they said, well, this is just something that happens postpartum. So now we're going to just make this normal. And they said what would happen is it was going to be hyper, and then it was going to swing to hypo, and then it was going to normalize. So I waited. And it did. It swung from hyper to hypo. So now I was cold again. I was gaining weight. I was dry skin, just really uncomfortable. And it never went away. It just never went away. So I went in and I said, I don't think it's gone. And they ran my labs, and guess what? It's normal. And so I lived in this space for a while. And then I went to see another doctor about some other stuff, and I mentioned it. And this doctor was maybe a little more progressive. And he had said that we should just check those antibodies. And sure enough, they were high. And that's where that journey began. So I went the Western medicine route. I went the route of Synthyroid and all those drugs that are supposed to help kind of like steer it around. And my doctor was pretty straightforward. He said, there's not a lot of research on this. They think that maybe these thyroid meds will help, but they didn't. In fact, it just made it worse. And so this is when I kind of lost my shit, for a lack of better words. I'm a very I don't know what the word is, willful person. I'm stubborn. I don't settle. I keep pushing until I find it. And that's just who I am. That's who I've always been. And so I got very frustrated at that point and I Googled it. And one of the first things that came up just in the search of like what else is there was gluten. So you asked, where did it all start? What were my first steps? My first step was stepping out of the box of this person has all the answers because they have a degree. That was my first step. it was saying, I trust that internally I'm not okay right now, and it's my responsibility. So that was the first step. You have to go there first. It's self-awareness. It's your catalyst for change. And if you don't know, or you don't trust yourself, or you don't take that responsibility, you're just never going to get to the next step.
Well, and I just want to interject if I
Yeah.
may. So most of our listeners, I think these words are making sense. You referenced getting tested for antibodies. So to clarify for people to understand what that means, that's a marker that autoimmunity is happening in your body. So basically, if you have positive antibodies on your thyroid, or really a positive, another test people do within the functional realm is an ANA, and it's anti-nuclear antibodies. That basically says that there's some autoimmune attack happening in your system. And again, inflammation is tied to that. So when you said you had positive antibodies for your thyroid, the TPO test, that means that there was an attack happening on your thyroid. And so women are medically gaslit to say this is a normal part of pregnancy. It's fairly common, unfortunately, that women do have thyroid effects in pregnancy. Sometimes they heal. Um, I would be super curious to follow these women into peri to see if they're in autoimmune at that point, because I know plenty of women who are in the same boat. And so you can have, and this is where this gets dicey, you can have, as you did, totally normal ranges for labs while still having autoimmune actions happening in your body. So that's where, if you suspect this, push for those tests.
Mhm.
If your Western doctor cannot get them for you, you can go to a functional health provider. A lot of clinics will actually allow you to order your own. So, like Arc Point Clinic is one, Quest Labs. There's some other labs too you can get them from, where you can just order your own like full thyroid panel, and you want it to be comprehensive, right? So if you're experiencing symptoms as to what Jess is saying, be your own advocate and look at those, and then take it to a provider who can help you interpret what that means. Because to your point, Western medicine was like, well, this is just what it is. Here's medicine. Because that's what they're trained on, is pharmaceutical interventions rather than root cause approach. Well, the more we understand about thyroids, the more we understand it's not as simple as putting someone on levothyroxine, Synthroid, or Armor, which are some pretty common thyroid meds. It's actually understanding why there's an immune process happening in the first place. So I just wanted to give a little more foundational like science to those who are like,
Yeah.
how does this relate and what's happening here? So point being, your labs already detected autoimmunity. And then as you searched, go on, you were mentioning the gluten was what came up. So talk more about
Yeah.
that.
Well, thanks for intervening in that, because, you and I talk about this stuff so much, and I've lived it for such a long period of time that I forget that it's really common language for me. This feels like something I went to school for. Like, it's so common because I dove in so hard. So yeah, to Angie's point, any of these symptoms, a lot of times you're going to the doctor and you are getting gaslit, and whether they don't intend to, it's how they're educated. It's the line they toe. And so you have to be your own advocate. But that TPO, that is your antibody measurement, and the significance of it is pretty big. And we're starting to get a lot more information about it. So I think Angie and I we'll put some resources in the description for this, for different docs that her and I have followed that talk about this as well. So if you're really suspecting you fall into this, you can click on those resources and you can follow people that have a lot of knowledge and have done great work. Yeah, so when I stepped out of the paradigm of Western medicine in regards to this, I did turn to Google. And I think a lot of people get shamed for, Dr. Google. But I tell you what, it absolutely changed my course in life. And there were mistakes along the way, and I
Mhm.
had more to learn. But where it started with gluten. And I found that to be fascinating. I didn't really know what gluten was. So for those of you who maybe don't know this either, which I think we live in a different world now where, you can go to a restaurant, you can see on the menu something is marked gluten free. But I think a lot of people don't fully understand what gluten is, and it got demonized. And I want to talk about that a little bit. So number one, gluten is a protein. It's a protein that is found in specifically wheat. You can find it in barley, rye, any of those types of products. It hides in other products that might be on a label as well. And you don't always know. So the reason gluten is so profound is twofold. Number one, gluten products along with soy products or corn products have high glyphosate. That's the number one factor. A lot of them are mass cropped, so they're mass sprayed with glyphosate to be hardy. Well, we end up ingesting that. The meat we eat comes from the corn the meat animal eats, and that has glyphosate. So glyphosate is a big thing. That's the number one reason why grain products in general or soy products can be so detrimental to the body. It's not that they're bad inherently. And I learned that later on. I think it's a really important distinction. I'm not demonizing gluten. But the other factor to gluten is this. If you do have a thyroid issue, specifically the antibody issue, gluten mimics a thyroid provoker. So the protein of gluten actually picks at your thyroid and makes it react, and it makes your body react. So that TPO, those antibodies, is really, it's just your body attacking the thyroid gland. Gluten triggers that, as does dairy. I didn't know this long ago. I just saw getting rid of gluten would help. So I did it. Day one, I just said no more gluten. I did not know what I was doing. So I ate a lot of rice, I ate a lot of meat, and I ate a lot of Fritos. So weird, such a weird thing, but they were corn chips. Um, Shopping for gluten free was very expensive, everything. But here's what happened. Within 2 weeks, I lost like 15 pounds of inflammation. That's how much of a burden was being placed on my body. And I thought, why would I ever go back? And so my journey really started with that. And it just kind of slowly shifted. And I mean slow. So if that started in 2005, 2006, by 2010, I was grain free. I became dairy free. I was sugar free. My friends joked that I was fun free. But I had seen my life go from looking in the mirror, not recognizing myself, being sick, being arthritic, being a young mom, had no energy, to being somebody who finally felt like I had a grasp on my life. It all started with that. And I taught classes during, some of those years after, just about, like the basics. It's this stuff. It's knowing what to look for on your food labels, understanding, what processed food really is versus whole foods, and your labels matter. And so I think Angie and I's message here is not so much, I mean, there's a lot of biohacks and we talk about it. There's a ton of biohacks in the world, and there's a lot of polarization around Western medicine versus, holistic, functional, integrative medicine, all these things. And I think really what the message is, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're taking responsibility for your decisions, and you're not putting all your eggs in this basket because this person claims to know everything, or this person. You have to advocate for yourself, and you have to start to trust that the messages your body is giving you is a sign of, hey, I need some support. I need you to work on something over here. And that's what a lot of this is. So that's where my journey started. That was the basics of it.
Right. And thank you for sharing. And I think a lot of people, it's become trendy to be gluten free. These last few years, especially, there's a lot more options and a lot more affordable options. The problem is that it is still ultra processed food. So, I think a foundational step for anybody before we even go into ultra processed is if you have inflammation across the board, I would highly consider, it doesn't matter if it's thyroid or not, get rid of gluten, at least for a month or two. Go gluten-free. Now try not to fill up with a bunch of ultra-processed things like snacky foods or things that, are gluten-free but maybe high in sugar, because you're kind of trading one problem for the next. But as you did, trade gluten for maybe rice or quinoa or something that's a little bit higher quality. You could do oatmeal too, but just make sure it's gluten-free, because a lot of oatmeal is cross-contaminated. So there is gluten in a lot of oatmeal. Um, Starting there can make a really big difference for a lot of people. And that was something that was recommended to me in 2020. And I had no idea. They just said go gluten free. I had no idea why. I'm someone who's analytical. Like, you tell me why, help me understand why it'll help me, and I will fully be on board. But if you just say cut gluten, dairy, corn, soy, all this, I'm going to be like, well, no. Like, I want to understand the rationale and how this is going to help. So that was what, I kind of had in 2020, was a person telling me to get rid of all the fun, but not the rationale. So as I've learned about why that was important, I've found too, I am predominantly gluten-free. I will say not fully, because if I eat at a restaurant, there's probably some cross contact. If I have a little scoop of ice cream and it has cookies in there, I might get some of that. Here's the problem though. If you are someone with autoimmune thyroid issues or celiac, that is detrimental. It takes the body a very long time to clear gluten. So for someone like me who is still trying to figure out kind of what my body's dealing with, I don't necessarily feel worse when I have a little cross contact. If I'm eating full gluten and I go gluten free, I feel so much better. But I don't traditionally have a lot of gluten these days. But if you're someone who does have autoimmune thyroid issues, even the smallest amount will throw you into a spiral. And it's going to take your body a couple months to clear that, which sounds crazy. So you have to be a massive steward for just not messing with it. And there are some things too, corn and dairy can mimic the proteins in gluten. So those can also cause you to have a hypersensitive reaction, thyroid wise and otherwise. There's some other foods, and I'm not recalling offhand. You can Google it though. I think even coffee is one, and chocolate, if I'm not mistaken. I just read this the other day. And so look into that. But again, you may not need to go that route. Maybe just getting rid of gluten is all you need. And then for a lot of people, dairy is highly inflammatory as well. And that was something that, as my body became more inflamed, I began to tolerate dairy far less. And for me, it was, I would get headaches within a few hours of eating something like cheese or ice cream. And that's also a reflection of intestinal permeability. So if you have leaky gut, which pretty much all of America does, you're going to be more reactive to things that otherwise wouldn't set your system off. So to heal that is to begin to take away the offensive foods. And truly, and this is deeper than we need to go today, an elimination diet is the gold standard of understanding what your body's reactive to. Now, 99% of people won't do this because it sucks. I've done it several times and it's not fun. Talk about like lacking fun and joy in your life, but I felt so good. I felt so good taking away inflammatory foods. And so, we'll leave that for a conversation another day if people need to go to that level. But just get rid of gluten, for a little while. Maybe if you notice you're someone who has migraines, take away dairy too. Take away gluten, dairy. There's a lot of alternatives that are good. I do some almond milk, for my coffee, or like cashew milk these days. You just want to make sure it's not filled with a bunch of filler like the guar gum, carrageenan. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah,
Carrageenan.
or
There's a bunch
Ian.
of fillers. So you want to make sure the labels are as simple as possible, that you know what the ingredients are. There's one I found at Whole Foods, and I forget the name of it, but I love it. It is a really good coffee creamer, and it's a cashew milk based, and it's like got a cinnamon flavor and I think a little bit of coconut milk. So if you can tolerate those or you don't have nut allergies, that's a really great alternative. It still is creamy, because I love to have that creaminess in my coffee. Um, and also with coffee, look at the coffees you're getting. So Bulletproof is a great brand. And then Four Sigmatic. Now they're expensive, but they're mold and mycotoxin tested. And so a big source of burden on our bodies and inflammation is mold and mycotoxins, which a lot of our foods can have that. Coffee is a massive source of that. So you can get organic coffee. That doesn't mean that it's mold free, because these coffee beans sit and they can just accumulate mold. So if you're again really sensitive, that's also just low hanging fruit. Switch your coffee, to a mold tested, mycotoxin tested. And again, those are the two that I know of that are that are for sure like high quality. I don't recall if Peace Brand is or not, but again, it doesn't matter if it's organic or not because it's going to potentially, it could have high levels of mold that you're introducing into your body, which can also cause a reaction. So, kind of my journey into this was really high levels of anxiety. And, how I got into hypnotherapy was for anxiety. And that made a massive difference because there was a big mindset component. But once I released that, what I realized was that what I thought was anxiety for all the years, which part of it was mental, was actually chronically high cortisol. So for me, chronic stress, chronically bad diet, years of, living a college life really kind of hit me. And then COVID, the stress of COVID and everything that happened there, plus the viral load from having COVID and all of that. So for me, going gluten free did help. Being dairy free did help. Um, and again, those are foundational, simple things you can do. As I began to learn more about environmental things, what I started to learn about was the toxin load in our homes. So this provider also told me to get rid of plugins, never told me why. So I didn't have rationale for why I'm getting rid of all this stuff I enjoy. Like I want a nice house that smells good. Why can't I have my candles and plugins? So the more I understood about what happens with plugins, like they're releasing a ton of off-gassing chemicals in your environment that you are directly inhaling in. So an alternative to that is an essential oil diffuser. You want to make sure again they're high quality oils. There's a couple of brands out there, DoTerra, Young Living are some good ones, Plant Therapy. So you want to make sure they're high quality, purity tested oils, and you can have a couple diffusers around your house. And some of them actually, like lavender, lemon, peppermint, actually have like antiviral properties in them too. So not only are you making your house smell nice, you're also cleaning the air. So get rid of those things and just slowly start making housing swaps. And that's what we did. I realized the Tide detergent we had, or Kirkland's brand from Costco, super toxic chemicals in there, a ton of microplastics. So once that was gone, I switched to a brand I found on Amazon that was all natural, much better. I got rid of dryer sheets because dryer sheets are also full of toxins and things that are you're directly wearing on your body. And what a better way to absorb toxins than through your clothes. So now I use wool, like all natural wool dryer balls, and I put a few daubs of essential oils on there. Make sure you let the oil sink in before you throw them in the laundry because otherwise you're going to have oil staining your clothes. So you want to make sure it absorbs really well. And then look at your cleaning products, right? So you have some Windex at home. When that's gone, switch over to, oh gosh, what's the brand of the towels everybody likes? Norwex.
Norway.
So
Yes.
Norwex, you buy them, they're a little pricey, but you know what? Once you have them, they last for a heck of a long time. So you can use Norwex with a little water to clean, and they also have antibacterial, antiviral properties. They have, I think, silver embedded into them, so they're really, really good. And look at different ways you can clean. Toilet bowl cleaner, you can shift over to like a vinegar solution with some baking soda, and again, maybe some essential oils for smell. So we've changed all of our cleaning products over in time because when I was looking at this stuff years ago, it was like drinking out of a fire hose. And I was like, oh my God, I have to get rid of all these things now. My shampoo's toxic, my makeup's toxic, all this stuff is toxic. And I had to just step back and say, you know what? Okay, now I know. And when this stuff is gone, I'm going to look for ways I can just make this healthy swap. If you guys remember that book from years ago, Eat This, Not That, it's kind of like that, but for your home. Like use this cleaning product, not that. But once that's gone, just make the shift. And so then you just start to build a sustainably healthy home because we are, assaulted by so many different things in our environment. And if you want to dive deep into this, I just started a book called The Rain Barrel Effect by Dr. Stephen Cabral. It's fantastic, but it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming how much in the modern era we are exposed to that is, death by a thousand cuts, as they say. And so the point is to not go into a complete spiral, but like what are the simple things in your environment that you can swap? And again, food is such an easy thing because we eat 3 to 5 times per day. So what are you putting in your mouth that's ultra processed that maybe you can make a better swap for? Maybe instead of the bag of chips and hummus, you opt for like veggies and like a high quality hummus, organic veggies. Maybe instead of buying the glutinous Wonder Bread, you switch to maybe you can tolerate gluten and you get like a whole wheat organic style bread or sourdough that's organic. So there are a lot of things you can do to lessen your burden. And you'll start to notice a difference. I think, what I've noticed that was kind of startling was I noticed a difference, but it began to like peel back new layers of healing. So I actually would have flare ups of symptoms even worse because I was starting to like unearth stuff that had been buried by other symptoms that I just was not yet aware of. And so it's not that I'm doing anything wrong. It's just that my body's asking for deeper levels of healing. And so, you and I talk often even about like liver support. We talked about that this morning. Like, how do you support your body? Because your liver is one of your primary detox organs, your liver, your kidneys, your lymphatic system. And so, when I was a nurse in the Western model, our doctors had the philosophy of you don't need to detox your liver because it is the ultimate detox organ. And that may have been true 100 years ago or 200 years ago when we didn't have the industrial revolution, coal mining, all these things that, we're now exposed to that are putting an emphasis of burden on our body. But these days, like you really have to be aware because that could also, and in my case, that's been a huge contributor to my inflammation. So, you can do castor oil packs. That's amazing. Just make sure if you get castor oil, it's in a glass bottle because castor oil pulls from whatever it's in. So if
A
it's in
dark
dark,
glass
yes,
bottle.
yes, a dark glass bottle. Um, Plastic, it'll leach from plastic. I didn't know that when I first got this quite a long time ago. And I had got, because I was Whole Foods, I'm like, oh, it's got to be good. It's Whole Foods, right? And I had gotten their castor oil. It was in a plastic bottle. Well, I started breaking out in rashes. I switched to glass, no problem since. I'm using it on my face. I do it on my liver most days. So you can do a castor oil pack on your liver. Make sure when you buy the supplies, though, that the pack itself is organic cotton, because again, castor oil is pulling chemicals. So if you're using treated or chemically altered materials, it's going to pull from that and it's going to go right into you. So that's a really simple thing you can do. All I do, you can wear it overnight, but that's a little intense for some people and kind of messy. When I get out of the shower, I throw it on and then I put my little like robe over it and I wear it for an hour. It's so easy. So I wear that while I'm getting ready, eating breakfast, and I take it off, kind of clean my skin and carry on with the day. So that's another way just to kind of help your detox, move naturally and rebounding too. This was something that I was like, well, this is like back to the 80s where women are like jumping on trampolines furiously. But unless you're like a runner or someone who does high intensity kind of jumping exercises, you're not getting good lymph flow. Even weight training, you're just not getting adequate enough bouncing to do proper lymph flow. So if you can't tolerate like a trampoline, I do like 5 minutes of rebounding most days of the week just to kind of move my lymph because that's our detox organ too. So your lymph can get stagnant, that can cause disease process. You can also do dry brushing, and there's a lot of information online as far as like how to do that, where the lymph points are in your body that you want to massage and kind of move around. So if you can't do impact for the purpose of joints or comfort or whatever, dry brushing is a great way, as well as sauna, doing a sauna. So I just have a sauna blanket that I use a couple days a week. And again, if you sweat, because you live in like a southern climate or something, you may not need a sauna. You might just naturally kind of be detoxing because of the environment you're in. But for those of us in the northern climate, we don't necessarily sweat as much as other people do. So we kind of have a higher burden of toxins that we're not naturally releasing compared to like maybe the southern states where it's 100 degrees, kind of half the year. So those are just some like simple, really foundational, super easy things that you can do. There's so many other things I could talk about, but I don't want to get in the weeds here and I don't want to overwhelm. So, is there anything else, Jess, before we wrap up? We'll kind of summarize the basics again before we, wrap this episode up. But are there any other things that we left out that are important foundational labs too? We talked about that, but get a good set of functional labs so you know what you're dealing with so that somebody can interpret that because you're kind of shooting in the dark. But again, you don't need labs to start making these lifestyle changes either, but it might be helpful to have a baseline.
Yeah. I think labs are really important, but to your point, like these are really good shifts. All these things that Angie mentioned, they're always going to benefit your body. Your body getting that extra support is always going to benefit everything. Something that I think is helpful to understand, you had said this earlier, on your journey, you wanted to understand the why. And I think we kind of touched on that, but you had mentioned the length of time it takes for foods to get through our body. specifically gluten, like these really ultra processed foods that tax our body, especially if we don't have a tight gut junction, which just means there's almost like a perforation in that gut lining where things leak out. It's 120 days, 120. And that is why people, when they start something like this, they do kind of immediately maybe see that, I call it the honeymoon period, where things kind of lift. And then sometimes it can get a little challenging. You got to remember, it's 120 days to get this to move through your system. So our body is going to start to lessen the burden, which is going to allow things to come through. The other thing that I just recently learned from a chiropractor, I was just dealing with some stuff with my horse. Honestly, animals too. Just, it's another rabbit hole, but this is not just a people problem. This is an animal problem. So your pets as well. But we were just talking about some healing, and he reminded me that it takes 30 days for our cells to turn over. So again, this is not stuff where you're going to see a shift overnight. Healing and change takes time. And the reason that I think this is such an important thing to remember is because it is like drinking out of a fire hose. A lot of this stuff Angie and I do every day, but we've done it for a really long time. And we didn't just wake up one day, clear our house out, add in all this stuff. This has been a transition. And in that transition, you are doing a natural cycle of lifting the burden off your body. So use what you have. You know, if you have a cabinet full of Kraft macaroni and cheese, and you're like, you know what? That's one thing I know I'm going to not eat again. Donate it. I don't care. Throw it away or give it to somebody who needs it. If you're not going to use it, those are things you can get rid of. But if it's more of a transition out of other stuff, whether it's your cleaning supplies or, you know, your toothpaste, right? We could go into fluoride and all those good things. Just do that stuff one by one, unless it feels really, really pressing to you and you're like, I think this is making me sick now. This is where you're taking control. And as you look to replace things, I encourage you to research it because you're building your database of knowledge. I'm really into that neurological pathway, and we end up understanding things better and reframing our identity by learning. And so we have to actually consume the information, understand why we're doing it. That's when we apply it, and it makes a future change. It's not just a fad or a trend, like I'm going to go gluten-free. It's not that. When you understand why you are, it's got lots of purpose in it. And that's where, you know, you're going to influence maybe your children, your spouse, whoever it is. So just remember, this is a cycle of time, not a quick fix, but you will feel different for sure. And, you know, you had touched on even just perimenopause. And here's the other thing that I think is really important to know. If you go and you get your antibodies tested and you see that they're elevated, they should be 0. 0 is where we want it. A year ago, my antibodies were 120. I'm 45 years old. I've managed my Hashimoto's, which is what the label is for what I have, with food. That's the only way you manage it. It's the only way. You have to make lifestyle and dietary changes. There's no medication for it. But now that I'm in perimenopause, I'm going through my midlife shift. Last year, my TPO was 120. High. Not awful, but high. This year it was 1700. 1700 with someone who's managing with their diet. I'm in a new phase and now I have to do new things because what I was doing no longer worked. So if you're like Angie and I and you're already doing this stuff and you're like, well, but it doesn't work. please go get your labs again. Get that full thyroid, your TSH, your free T3, your T4, your TPO. Get it all. Get your vitamin D3. See if they can look at your B12. See, if you're methylating. There are so many things that will be reflected. And those are little markers that let you know you're in a different place and you might need to do something different, which is where Western medicine can be a little bit helpful. Because once you hit that threshold, you're not going to be able to just do it with diet changes. But don't start with medicine. Start with your lifestyle. Let your lifestyle show you what more you need for support. And that's a big thing we talk about. This
Right.
comes full circle.
Well, and it's about health sovereignty. All of this is about bringing the responsibility back on us. And that's empowering because we can choose what we put in our mouth. We can choose what comes into our home. We can choose, to some extent, our interpretation of stress. And trust me, that is a struggle for me often. So I'm still trying to figure that out. So none of this is meant to shame anybody. And a lot of people will say, well, it's a privilege that you can do this. It is for sure. But you know what? Jessica and I put things on credit cards to make this happen. We have had to give up so much to fund our healthcare. So if you're someone saying, I can't afford this, I can't, whatever, can you afford to not though? Do you want the next 20, 30 years of your life to be horrible because of autoimmunity or because of chronic illness, because of cancer? 1 in 2 people are going to get cancer. So if you can do anything to heed that off, is that not the best investment in yourself? And we are here as resources. We have walked through fire. You spent over 100 grand on your health. I've spent over 50 in the last 5 years on mine. We've learned a lot. We've learned who not to see, who to consider looking at, things to avoid, things to maybe add. And that's been super valuable. So if we can help you shortcut your journey, just as like someone to consult with, like reach out because we've learned a lot of lessons. And, we are by no means experts at this, but we are experts in our bodies. And this is what people are being prompted to do. We can't fix a system that's broken, right? Like we can't remove all the toxins in our environment. We can minimize the ones in our home, though. We can minimize what we let into our space. And so, that does come back to your locus of control. The only control you have is yourself and your family, your children, or influence, I should say, right? Maybe you can't control your kids, but you have influence. And so it starts with just taking radical accountability and not being a victim and saying, you know what, maybe I can't afford this right now. But I'll tell you what, there are plenty of 0% credit cards that exist right now. And I've taken out a few in the last couple of years to make this happen. And I pay them off in time. But I have prioritized that, which meant I wasn't going on trips. My husband and I have insanely old vehicles because we don't care, like that's not what defines us. So it's also like breaking the paradigm of keeping up with the Joneses. The Joneses are fucking broke. So like stop trying to compare yourself with the people around you who have the flashy shit and invest in something that actually matters, which is health. And I tell you that as a former hospice nurse who has seen people at their end of time and the regrets they've had about life and the relationships and the things that really matter. It's not the size of house you live in. It's not the car you drive, but it's the quality of life you can live, and that's in your relationships too. And that's a really powerful part of healing is having a strong community, and Jessica was, a listening ear for me as I was bawling my eyes out on Friday and Saturday this week. I had just a total breakdown and like a pretty substantial release about everything that's been going on. And it was amazing to release it. But I also just needed to be heard. And having someone who's like, Ange, you can tell me the same thing over and over and over, and I will never get sick of it. And I will always hold space for you. And I'm not sitting in victimhood. Like, I just needed to release. And then I was like, okay, I feel better. And now I'm getting better clarity. There's a difference in like being the person who complains and doesn't take action. And that's not what we're about. Don't be that person, but just take the small action steps you can. And, I think we'll do more episodes on this where we'll dive in deeper, to some of these different things because there's so much to talk about that, you can go as far down the rabbit hole as you want or as surface level. Take it in bite-sized pieces that are sustainable. It's just the small, sustainable steps that are going to make a difference. So, again, we'll link some resources in the show notes, including, we'll have our websites on there for contact if you want to get a hold of us. And if there's specific questions you have about a topic that you're dealing with or a certain autoimmune, you and I have studied a lot of different autoimmune conditions. So if you want us to dive into a specific area, we are happy to give you every ounce of knowledge that we can, that we have up to this point. And I just want to say, I should have said this at the beginning, none of this is medical advice. So this is for educational purposes only. And always talk with your doctor before starting supplements, changing your regimen, or again, find a functional provider if you really want that more holistic hand holding. But again, these are pretty easy lifestyle changes. But again, none of this is intended to be diagnostic or in any way medical advice. So please know that you have to use your discernment when you're researching things, when you're looking into providers. You got to get really good at trusting your intuition, because we've even met functional providers who have led us very far astray. So just because someone claims to be a functional practitioner does not mean that they are going to be the one that can help you. So, but again, there's a lot of good people out there who do have good intentions. It's just a matter of kissing enough frogs till you find the one. So that being said, thanks so much for tuning in, everybody, and reach out if you have questions, and we'll catch you next time.
Catch you next time.